It's my privilege to welcome to the TaxWatch stage Representative Matt Caldwell. He is running for Commissioner of Agriculture. He is a member of the Florida House of Representatives representing District 79. He first was elected in 2010. He has served on several important committees during his time in the Florida House, including transportation, tax policy, redistricting, insurance, banking, and local government, and federal government affairs. He received his associate's degree from Edison College and his Bachelor of Arts in History from Florida Gulf Coast University. Matt and his wife Yvonne live in North Fort Myers, where they raised their daughter Ava. Representative Caldwell, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Tell us why you want to be the Commissioner of Agriculture.
It really is an awesome opportunity to lead on the executive side on the issues I've always really focused on and cared about in my legislative career. You named off many of the committees, and I've had the opportunity to have a pretty diverse portfolio. But my number one choice was Ag and Natural Resources. That was the committee I got on my very first freshman year and ended up chairing that, and then for the last 4 years, the full committee above it. And so had an awesome opportunity to work with the commissioner, work with the legislature and the governor, and carry pretty much every major piece of legislation that impacted this office and our state's natural resources. All the Everglades packages for the last 8 years. The statewide water bill in 2016, 3 years of the negotiation to put together a pretty comprehensive package, and environmental issues, nutrient criteria, when the previous administration at the federal level was not quite so friendly on a business perspective. And so the chance to go and take a leadership role and continue to craft and push the state in the direction I think we should go on those questions really is a great opportunity for us.
Agriculture has had a tough go of it in Florida. It's one of our signature industries, but especially citrus in recent years due to disease and now the hurricane has had a tough go of it. What do you see as the future for citrus, and what will you do to fight for citrus in Florida?
Sure. So no doubt citrus is our signature crop, and so everybody knows that. And the market has changed, and not just because of the acute pressures that we've had of disease over the last decade or the hurricanes' direct impact this last year, but just in general, the entire world landscape on that's already changed with competition internationally. And so that industry is not going to go back to the way it was in the 80s, where you could have 20 acres, raise a family. And that's pretty typical, by the way, when you look at most commodities. It is really separating into two universes in the ag sector. You're either very, very big, in which you can offset those fixed capital costs at a scale that you can compete in the global market, or you're very, very small and very specialized, and you're selling within either a specialized product or something that differentiates you from that commodity. So, citrus is not going to disappear, but what it looks like and how it operates will continue to change. I think we have dedicated the resources, and will continue to, for the research on disease and trying to address that. And you see some promise in terms of varieties that folks are replanting, but it's going to continue to be a commitment and have to be a commitment to not just citrus, but all of our various crops. We're incredibly unique from the rest of the country. We've got about 300 plus commodities in the ag sector compared to most states that maybe have a top 3 or a top 5. So the strategies and the way that you interact with the ag sector is very, very different for Florida, and the concerns that grow out of that are very, very different, frankly, than the other Florida states.
One of the things that we don't think a lot about when we think about agriculture in Florida is ranching. We think a lot about farming. But Florida is one of the leading producers of cattle with the cow-calf operations that we have in the central part of the state. That takes a lot of land for those cows, more than it takes for traditional farming. Talk to us about ranching in Florida and what you think the future of ranching is and how we can preserve that industry.
Sure. I mean, fundamentally, it's the original agriculture. You look at starting back with the Spanish occupation 500 years ago. They set the cattle loose in the woods, and they grew from that. I mean, that future was what brought my mom's family to Florida. 1826 to make milk, and they were ranching there in north central Florida. If you were able to work hard and clear the trees and gather up some cows, you could start your own future with that. And it's going to continue to play a pivotal role. The ability for us to have the wintertime forage to support the calf operation, as you described. We raise them to 6-7 months old and sell them to the rest of the country. Then they make their way back here eventually on our plates. But it's going to be a critical part of that picture, and how do you protect that landscape has been one of the things I've worked on a lot in the policymaking side. So trying to find ways, I think, to change the discussion of the conservation sector, find the place where they intersect the best, and one of those programs has historically been the Rural and Thinning Lands program through the Department of Agriculture. I've proposed to be able to achieve in some parts moving our conservation focus from just buying large swaths of land and putting them in public ownership, where people don't visit them, honestly. We don't really have the resources to maintain them and keep them in the condition they should be. We should be shifting that into a focus of easements, conservation easements that allow the agricultural operation to continue to occur and achieve the bigger goals in conservation, the open space for large animals or aquifer recharge, things like that. If it's not something that we're going to use directly, a beach, a lake, a spring, the places where we should be investing in infrastructure, building facilities, putting employees, then it should go in the same category. And that really does have well from my perspective.
The environment is something that's really important to farmers, and obviously it's essential to the economy of Florida. And we've probably recognized better than most states that the environment and the economy are inextricably linked. As the Commissioner of Agriculture in Florida, what will your focus be in terms of the environment, and how do you see that as part of your charge as the Commissioner?
Well, we've already implemented a good part of responsibility. The department's responsible for developing with UF-IPIS the best management practices, and as you look at the areas where we've identified there's a need for restoration, both in quality and quantity, through the basin plans, the best management practices are usually step one, and getting those integrated, and that's by sector, by crop variety or product specific, and there's a responsibility already along for the department to develop that, and we would, if I had the opportunity, continue to grow that and facilitate that real commitment and understanding on the part of the ag sector to the environment. And truthfully, you really already see that. I mean, you look at an area like the Everglades, the challenges we deal with there, and that very complicated restoration mosaic. The farming community south of the lake is the only taxpayer that pays two taxes to the South Florida Water Management District. First, the millage that all the rest of the citizens paid, but then second, a per acre tax, specifically to originally construct their water treatment facilities, and then now long term, we implemented in the bill in 2013 the basic payment to maintain over the long haul. So you really, I think, have seen agriculture be on the forefront of the expectation and the commitment to environmental stewardship and restoration. That's going to have to continue to be a huge part of how we achieve those goals we've set out.
Talk a little bit about the consumer protection piece of the Department of Agriculture. A lot of folks don't know that you have this consumer piece and that you kind of share in that responsibility with other agencies like the Attorney General's office. But tell us what you would do as Commissioner to ensure that that part of your office functions well for the people.
Sure, and so we've been, I think we were talking a moment ago, we hit a year, May 1st, have been on the road 60,000 miles, and have made a commitment to visit as many businesses that are regulated by the department as possible, and ask them that simple question: what do you like about the department, what's going right, and what do you not like, what's going wrong, and what are the things I need to understand? And it's sometimes difficult to maybe tease out the challenges of the specific situation versus, was the department really effective? But if there's any one complaint I do hear, it's about people not feeling like they were responsible enough to their complaint on whatever fraud issue or the do not call list as a perennial complaint that you receive. And so, look, it's the responsibility of the department to focus on those two roles, to investigate allegations of being scammed or ripped off, to be able to develop a reasonable case against individuals if they are habitually doing this, particularly when it comes to our senior community. And it's the responsibility of the department to really go after the do not call list. This is a program that's been assigned to the department to achieve. So, I come from obviously a legislative background. From my intention, when you write the law and you pass the law, you intend to see it achieved. And so I can certainly commit to you that my expectation, if I have the chance to be an executive, is to make sure we are achieving those expectations that we set out for.
One of the big priorities of what will be your predecessor, Commissioner Putnam, was water. And I think looking back on his time as Commissioner of Agriculture, he did more to advance recognition of the water issue than I think anyone has ever done. That issue is not going away, right? Whether it's water supply or rising sea level issues, which we certainly in Southeast Florida are experiencing, having floods in October with the king tide that, being a native Floridian, I never saw when I was a kid, and now we have a couple weeks of the year on the east side of Miami Beach, Fort Lauderdale, places like that where we have immense flooding. Talk to us about water and what you think your role will be in continuing to highlight that issue and work towards solutions as the commissioner.
Absolutely, and on the stump speech, the kind of the key three issues I always want to make sure to touch on is jobs, guns, and water, and that really defines the office and the responsibilities it has in the broad scheme of things. And water has been a huge passion of mine, as we said, passed the statewide water bill in 2016, and we could spend, 2 hours talking in the direction between supply, quantity, reaction to the questions you raised. We are going to have a challenge. Look, most of this state, at one time in its history, has been underwater. The coastline used to be much farther out than it is now. What direct impact we have or can have on that is going to be hotly debated, continue to be debated. What I do know in that sphere is the things we can do that are beneficial in other ways, dune restoration, coastal hardening, that's good practices, mangrove restoration, those are good practices for what we know will always be here, which is hurricanes, in as much as those have a benefit potentially to whatever happens in sea level. I'm going to commit to those solutions. They make sense in a bigger picture no matter what. On the water side, the worst outcome for us would be to end up like California. California is in a disaster now. The farmers have already lost, and it's really already now boiled down to a battle between the environment and the urban sector. And it's just been a gross mismanagement of both their resource and their opportunities. The benefit we have is all but one of our major urban areas is on the coast. So when you look at what can ultimately be a solution, which is desalinization, that is expensive. My granddad always told me, you're never going to run out of water in Florida, but you might run out of cheap water. And the truth is that's ultimately going to be a policy solution we can achieve, and that really just comes down to a financial commitment. But even before we get there, there's so many simpler things we can do. You look at like Miami-Dade County, where they can't give you a hard number, but they estimate they lose maybe 30 to 50% of their water between the water plant and faucet because the system itself is so aged and decrepit. That's not that is a serious public work project, but it's not some pie in the sky vision. That's just regular maintenance and upkeep of your water system. And I could double the amount of water we actually use. So a lot of issues, the right policy and commitment to the right infrastructure. That's where I've been in the legislature, and I continue to advocate as an executive.
Let me ask you one more question before we open it up to the audience. Let me take you, fast forward you to January of next year. You've just been elected and sworn in as the Commissioner of Agriculture. Tell us what the first 100 days of Commissioner Caldwell's administration looks like.
Well, it's going to be revisiting those issues you've seen me fight passionately for the last 2 years on state lands and water policy, and getting queued up for a session that will be held in March, and trying to see what we're able to hit the ground running on those. And then it's going to be really working hard on probably the 2 most frustrating issues in the agricultural sector that I mentioned earlier, how unique we are compared to the other states, and how intensely both trade and labor decisions at the federal level affect the ability for our farmers to be successful. And really the decisions to date have been far out of sync with what's in our best interest, although they may be perceived as in the best interest of other states' ag sectors. So I really believe that it's going to be the responsibility of the commissioner to be far more vocal and aggressive on those 2 questions and getting them solved. I mean, I've always had an attitude with my service in the legislature to respond to what the constituents are asking me to work on. I mean, that's the job. Ultimately, I'm there to represent them. And so as I, again, travel around, you visit with the businesses that are overseen and regulated by the department, what are the concerns that are really keeping them up at night? What are the things that are preventing them from being successful and actually, in many ways, destroying their existing businesses? Those are the things that I think the commissioner is going to have to get involved in. And so ultimately the two big issues of the day, from my perspective, are the challenge at the federal level for our ag sector and are continuing to straighten out our land and water policy for the future.
Just on a lighter note, we were talking before we started today that when you travel around the state and campaign, you get to eat a lot of barbecue. So my question is, do you have a couple favorites that you want to share with the group on the best barbecue in Florida?
Oh, listen, you start picking favorites, like picking your favorite children. I will tell you, it's running for ag commissioner, you definitely get the best diet. You pretty much eat steak and banana pudding every single day. And you have to be very, very careful on the calorie counting stick.
Well, maybe after you're sworn in, you'll give us like a food guide to some.
We can put that together.
Let me open it up to the audience for any questions for the representative. Right here. Well, Principal, we're going to wait and start with you second. How about this young lady here in the middle?
Is this on? I'm thrilled to hear you address water issues and that's consistently something when you speak to constituents. I'd like to hear a little about the protection and preservation of our springs.
Yeah, absolutely. So a major feature of the water bill in 2016 was springs protection. It was really the inspiration that Senator Charlie Dean had to get involved in the issue from his side, and we kind of married up and started talking about more global policy, both in land and water issues. And what we achieved there was really the first huge step, identifying that all of our first magnitude springs would have a basic management action plan. Simply identify what problems you have in any water body in quality and quantity, identify projects to fix that, and then hopefully then we can have a price tag to give either the state or the water district or the county or whoever to participate in achieving those. And we're seeing those begin to get implemented. The truth is we've got two kind of sets of springs. Overwhelmingly, the majority of our first magnitude springs we have purchased as a state and put into conservation territories. But there are a handful that we have loved to death. We have developed, we've built right up on top of them, and it shows. The wear and tear, whether you're talking about Silver Springs or Rainbow or Weeki Wachee, there's no doubt the fact that we've piled on top of them has a direct impact on their health. And so those are going to be much more complicated. It's far simpler for the ones, Blue Spring in Madison County, for example, where we have bought and made a park and we've got some pretty significant setbacks in terms of impacts you could ever have on them. So the benefit of what we achieved in addition to the Springs bill, or the water bill, but then Legacy Florida, when we dedicated $50 million a year to specifically Springs projects. In fact, both the Swanee and St. John's have told us they can't come up with enough projects to fill $50 million, but I think they can. They're going to have to really put their nose to the grindstone on it, but they have that commitment every year now to build and construct those projects, particularly in the urbanized springs that are going to need all the help they can get to put them back in a healthy state. And to put a little caption on it, in the big picture, we do have to grapple with the reality of how much the drought in the last decade really exacerbated. They kind of came together. We had a development boom and a drought that hit at the same time. And so the spring is so dynamic. It's not just the input of a nutrient load or stormwater, but it's also the health of the actual water flow that's occurring. And as much as we think we understand, we really are still juveniles in figuring out what's historic aquifer impacts versus just a daily rainfall impact, and how do those two actually play with each other to make the spring operate at its maximum potential.
Principal.
Okay, well, I have a couple of questions for you. Piggyback on what she's saying about the spring. It would be nice because I'm an educator, it would be nice if there were some type of grants or things out to, not just in the social studies field where you have 4th and 5th grade when they're talking about Florida, but understanding about the springs out there. Because being in a Title I school and knowing many Title I schools in Palm Beach County, they don't know anything about the springs. And educating the kids, because those are our future, will help enlighten them and what they can do also out in the springs to educate. So if you do become the agriculture, maybe there's some kind of funding or grants for schools out there. But my question to you is about school lunches.
Being in a Title I school, I know that the kids, they do have free breakfast, they have lunch, and they also are now supplying dinner and a snack. Why they're not doing this all across in all the schools? And that's my question. If you would become the agriculture commissioner, would you want, what is your intake on that?
Sure, absolutely, and there's no doubt this is a question that I can speak to. So my wife also teaches 5th grade at a Title I school. She grew up in Immokalee. Her parents were farm workers when they were kids. The challenges that come with Title I communities are many and they're varied, but being able to not be hungry is kind of a baseline concern. Now that program is almost exclusively funded through federal pass-through. So to your question of getting beyond the lunchroom, lunch period to the breakfast or the dinner time, that's ultimately going to take additional funding. And the counties that are doing it, they're doing it with their local dollars to expand that program. Look, we could, like water policy, we could spend 60 hours talking about the structure of K-12 education and the money that we spend there. Ultimately, I think the things that we commit to, we can fund. The money is there. It's a matter of what the priorities are and what you want to make the priorities from the beginning. I do agree with you, though, that if a student comes and is hungry, they're thinking about that. They're not going to be able to learn. The other real benefit, I was a freshman when we moved the school nutrition program from the governor to the commissioner's office. And one of the goals there, it wasn't that you talked about education on springs, but I was going to transition to education on food. Florida, again, is so different than the rest of the country. When our crops are ripe, what kind of crops we grow here. So if you have curriculum that's written by somebody who lives in Ohio, it's completely useless to your students in terms of understanding where they live and what kind of agricultural universe they operate in. That was a goal originally, that program. It really hasn't, we haven't seen it expand beyond maybe a handful of counties. I would still like to see that commitment because in the same way for your students to understand, your freshest, ripest fruits and vegetables are also going to be your most affordable. I mean, those are the things that are local, those are the things that they can be paying attention to and looking for as they're probably not 5th graders, but middle schoolers and high schoolers taking more responsibility for themselves and their nutrition.
And my last question is talking about agriculture in the lunchroom itself, growing your own basil and the students eating it, growing your own corn or anything that the schools can work with, grow with the districts or in the food industry. Will there be more grants if you become the agricultural commissioner? Would you see that there'll be more grants or some kind of funding for these public schools that they will be able to entice with the students and try to teach them that you don't need to go to Burger King or McDonald's, you can grow your own food and this is cheaper?
You could actually do it yourself. No, we toured Flagler County last week. We toured their ag-centric school there in the district where their students are growing their own food and using it in their cafeteria there. And I think that is a program that you should see expanded to as many schools as possible. Not only is it healthy education for the students themselves, but it's healthy food that they can feed themselves and offset the cost. Just the cost alone between the food they don't have, this district doesn't have to buy, should be able to be applied to what you need to buy for materials to even put it in place when you offset those two questions. But, as I was talking about with the original answer, it is a very interesting system we have in K-12 education where the districts drive so much of the decision-making of what they're going to make the priorities. And I can tell you, I have the scars to show from having these debates with the districts about how much the state should have the right to come in and say, this should be a program in all 67 counties, and then we get told, don't tell us what to do and XYZ thing. What would I definitely commit to you? That the department would be a resource, for sure, on how to implement a program. What are the things they should be prioritizing? What are the crops that they can easily grow in their ripe windows, in their community? Because that's even different from Pensacola to Miami. What you grow, what time of the year in the Panhandle is totally different than what you grow in Miami. So, but so many people don't know that. I mean, 1,000 new people a day, that includes so many of the teachers in the classroom, don't grow up here, don't know that. They don't even know how to educate in that question to the students. So being the resource and being available to provide those resources to the teachers and to the districts would be a bare minimum I would commit to you, and then beyond that, working with the districts as best we could to achieve those goals.
Other questions? Representative Brzezak.
Thank you. Representatives, thank you for your willingness to take on this challenge, right? So the department also looks at energy. And so my question to you is, how does energy factor into your calculation with respect to its engagement, the department engagement with energy policy, and things of that nature?
That's a really, thank you, Representative Say. That's a really fascinating question. So I think pretty clearly the original intention of the creation of Office of Energy at the Ag Department was in a period before the boom in natural gas exploration. And we were all trying to work through, how do we diversify from a almost exclusively coal-based energy production system in Florida. We have some nuclear, but overwhelmingly dependent on coal, which not only had to be shipped in, but you've got environmental concerns. So we were kind of try everything between tax credits, incentives, different alternative forms of energy. And then that whole equation was upended with the boom in shale gas. And so the cost per unit of energy is so incredibly low now with natural gas. We still have that same concern, although the environmental quality is considerably better than with coal. Just the off gas of what comes from burning that, we're still overwhelmingly dependent on a single form of energy. So my vision would be twofold. One, looking for ways to remove obstacles in the marketplace to diversification in the energy sector. A lot of that's going to require working with the PSC. Obviously, the overwhelming production of energy in our state is done through regulated utilities, and so if you're not on the same page with the PSC, you're probably not going to achieve whatever goals you lay out. But again, I'm going to be an open book on that question. How do we achieve the goals, which is diversification of the source, so we're not dependent on one thing, and continuing to push forward in a future that's better for the environment overall. So.
Anything else? Robert.
Commissioner or Representative, you're running for a very complicated position. It's technically the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, and you've already been asked about the environment and energy. It covers a lot of things. Your commitment to and knowledge of agriculture and the environment is clear, and your passion for it is obvious. For a job so complex, it also serves on the Clemency Board and on the Cabinet. How would you explain the job to kids, or if you had to explain to somebody who was unfamiliar with this position you're running for, how would you summarize it?
Well, explaining that to kids is a different one I've been asked. I have a fun time. As I said, my wife's a fifth grade teacher. She has me go not only speak to her class, but then she now has voluntold me to go to many other classes every year to do a civics lesson.
Did you say voluntold?
Voluntold.
That's a good word.
Absolutely. You will be in this classroom this day. Good luck. But no, it is a big part of the campaign for most people. Again, back to that, the beauty of our state is we constantly have the ability to grow with 1,000 new people a day. The drawback is they aren't from Florida, they don't know what's unique and interesting about our state, so you're constantly taking just an education role. So I tell on the stump, first it is a cabinet role, so 1 of 4 people, insurance, banking, utilities, land development disputes, clemency, pension, and then all of your state lands, all of your parks, your forests, your wildlife areas, all your submerged waterways. You need to make sure that whoever you elect to CFO, Attorney General, Commissioner, and Governor can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I certainly think the diversity of interest and activities I've shown in the legislature, I've covered many of those bases in my time there. I think I could probably tackle many of them without undue difficulty. But the inside the department is incredibly unique. And there, I kind of make the joke, if you've ever seen the show Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe, then you have seen basically everything the Department of Agriculture oversees. It is the commissioner of dirty jobs. So oil changes, auto repair, amusement parks, county fairs, surveyors, security guards. If you just think about the fact that it oversees amusement parks and agriculture, it oversees the #1 and 2 industries in the state of Florida. So it is an incredibly important position, not only in terms of its impact on the job market, but in terms of who you choose in terms of their attitude and how they're going to operate that department, how they're going to treat those businesses, which overwhelmingly are small businesses. Small businesses that a single shift in public policy can have a radical impact on their success or failure. And certainly, I think those of you who follow me know me. I'm a very conservative person in my philosophy. You're not going to see me place an undue burden on small business owners. My attitude is going to be one of trying to get to yes rather than tell them no. I think that's been the attitude, frankly, that's been in place for the previous administrations, and one that I'd like to continue. But when you've got 3,800 employees, you've got to set an attitude at the top, and that winds its way through the entire department.
Thank you.
So everyone give a round of applause for Representative